So I've been sitting on this video for quite a while now. I've even re-scripted this about 5 different times, and I feel like I've nearly reached a point of insanity while making this. I was close to dropping this video actually, but in the end you guys seemed interested in it, so I still decided to make this evidently, and well, also my previous video is a bit outdated and pretty bad, so I felt the need to update it. So for this video I've decided to scrap a lot of my script and make a more down-to-earth discussion style video on this topic. Something more opinionated, I guess, going over my own experiences and thoughts with Nintendo, rather than something more over-edited and factual, even like my previous video. Look, I feel like I've been rambling on a bit too much, which isn't a great way to start the video, so let's get into this. The Nintendo Switch, personally I felt extremely underwhelmed and disappointed by Nintendo during this console's lifespan, to the point where, yes, I do prefer the Wii U and 3DS over the Switch. And more specifically, the period of, say, 2012 to 2016 compared to 2017 to present day. Okay, yeah, that's an extremely unpopular opinion, but that's all the more reason why I felt the need to discuss this. You know, every time I see discourse online about praising the Wii U, especially in comparison to the Switch, there will always be people dismissing those opinions without exception. People complain about how others romanticize the Wii U, how they are overlooking how truly bad it was for its time, how it's virtually a fact that it was a shit console and a shit time for Nintendo fans, and any rebuttal to that is always met with claims of nostalgia bias or looking through rose-tinted glasses or whatever BS excuse is used to devalue these opinions. No matter how many facts I bring up or how into depth I go into my own opinions, people still claim I'm delusioned or whatever, and it frustrates me to no end, so... And yeah, sure, I get it. There are plenty of reasons here and there you can point to why the Switch may seem a lot better than the Wii U, but I can't help but believe a vast majority of these people never even owned a Wii U and just speaking out of their asses, and I mean, statistically, it's a fair assumption, considering that at most only 10% of Switch owners, if even that, owned a Wii U. And mind you, I'm not in complete disagreement that the Wii U was bad, it's just I don't think the Switch is that much better. And I'm confused to why so many people are willing to bash the Wii U so much but praise the Switch to high heaven. Sure, if you're new to Nintendo or just skip to the Wii U even, I'm sure the Switch has been a great console, a fantastic time for Nintendo as a whole, but as a Wii U owner, as someone who's more of a long-term supporter of Nintendo, it's been quite the opposite scenario for me. And that's more or less the crux of this video, how this current era of Nintendo has been made infinitely worse for the people who actually supported Nintendo during their darker days. Anyway, I know this might come off as a bit of whiplash, but yeah, I definitely would say the landscape surrounding Nintendo has improved massively since my last video, surprisingly enough. This upcoming year is seriously looking like one of Nintendo's best years in, well, forever. We have Splatoon 3, Mario & Rabbids, Bayonetta 3, Mario Strikers, Fire Emblem Warriors, Xenoblade 3, Breath of the Wild 2 is coming out early next year, and that's just to mention a few. On top of that, there's bound to be more games announced beyond that, and that's not even mentioning Metroid Dread, which was a fantastic game that released late last year, and Pokemon Legends Arceus and Kirby the Forgotten Land, which both released earlier this year and were both massive evolutions in franchises that had otherwise gotten pretty stale. It's really been a complete insane change in direction for Nintendo, and I really did not expect this last year when I made my original video. In fact, if Nintendo were to maintain this momentum until the end of the Switch's lifespan, I honestly could imagine my opinion doing a complete 180. But as of now, I can't say my opinions have been impacted all too much. Mostly for the issue that is, while this year may seem to be fantastic, does it really make up for the previous ones? Does one great year make up for 4 otherwise underwhelming ones? Especially when you start to realize how long of a time 4 years really is. I mean, the Wii U was killed off only a few months after it turned 4, and that's only because Breath of the Wild released, which was on the Switch anyway. So I think it's about time to develop more on these more pressing issues I have with Nintendo. I guess I'll start with the most important part of a video games company being the video games they've actually made. Of course, I need to stress that the games they made, I'm not talking about third-party games in this video, and yeah, I get that it is 30 times better than previously, even if there aren't as many notable exclusives on the Switch compared to 3DS, nor is it even good compared to the competition, but I digress. I'm solely talking about Nintendo in this video, their games, their products, nothing else. And when it comes to their games, it's a widely accepted fact that the Switch has good games, but the Wii U doesn't. But I don't know about that. Late last year when Metroid Dread released, I came to an absolutely disturbing realization, and that was that I could really just entered the Switch at that point in its lifetime and not really felt like I missed out on that much. That had I just bought Metroid Dread with a Switch OLED of a handful of other games, I would have been totally content in retrospect. Of course, me being a rabid Nintendo fan, I don't know if I could have slept on a system for this long, but I mean, it's just kind of depressing to come to this conclusion that I'd otherwise just assessed 4.5 years of Nintendo as more or less kinda useless to me, specifically if I had to go into a bit more depth with this. The system seller games, the games I would have picked up the Switch for, there were only 3 of them prior to Dread, being Mario Odyssey, Smash Ultimate, and maybe Age of Calamity. There's also kinda Fire Emblem Three Houses, but I didn't end up liking that game anyway. Nor Smash. Beyond the system seller games, there's only been a small handful of other games I even enjoyed that weren't on my radar. I really loved Paper Mario the Origami King, but hot take, but beyond that, there's not much else. Splatoon 2's Octo expansion and Bowser's Fury were good expansions, and Astral Chain was alright, but I kinda felt mixed on it in the end. But that's pretty much it, which is depressingly small considering that prior to Dread the Switch had been supported for longer than the Wii U. The Wii U of which had a lot more games that I enjoyed, a hell of a lot more system seller games and games I enjoyed that I didn't have on my radar, and even to this day with games like Metroid Dread and Kirby the Forgotten Land, I still would argue that the Wii U offered more games that I enjoyed. And yeah, of course, the 3DS, of which released a hell of a lot more games than the Wii U did, and on the side of the Wii U. It's not even a competition to me. The Wii U and 3DS combined easily blow the Switch out of the water, and yeah, okay, maybe I shouldn't dwell on this for too long. I know I said I'd make this a bit more of an opinionated video, but maybe this is going a bit too far on this. While the Wii U was able to cater towards my own tastes a hell of a lot more than the Switch has been able to, I'm sure a majority of people would be the opposite way around. But even so, I can't help but believe that there surely are a lot of other people in the same boat as me, considering the extremely low output of games from Nintendo during the Switch era. I know it isn't fair to expect Nintendo to have as many games compared to the Wii U and 3DS combined, but I do think it's more than fair to expect the Switch to have a higher output than just the Wii U, which may I say is very comparable. Okay, yeah, the Switch has the pandemic to deal with, which is a fair argument, but this was a problem before 2020. The entirety of 2018, the first half of 2019, and the first half of 2020 were pretty dry periods for Nintendo, pretty miserable times for Nintendo fans, and it really sucks that this was all immediately followed by the COVID, which screwed over the rest of 2020 and subsequently last year as well, which wasn't that great considering there weren't any big holiday titles or anything. And on top of all this, 2019 didn't really have any games that appealed to me, so I mean that's kinda just 4 straight bad years there, for me at least. I just find it a joke that the biggest complaint about the Wii U was its droughts, and yeah, sure it wasn't great, the launch period was pretty bad. Well, so was the Switch's, but it wasn't as severe, but whatever. And 2016 was pretty awful as well, especially the latter half was pretty bad. It was still better than 2018, but still bad. But it's nowhere near as bad as the Switch has it. I assume that the combination of third-party support and ports have clouded people's judgments, I guess, but it's so obvious to me that the Wii U just had it so much better. Especially when you consider that in between these long waits with Wii U games, there were 3DS games to play. I can't say that about the Switch. I don't know if this is going to come off as crazy, but in terms of Nintendo games, there was always something to play back then. Whether it be on Wii U, whether it be on 3DS, but I feel like I've constantly had to wait months at a time to find Switch games that interest me. I made a timeline of all the first and second party retail Nintendo releases over the past decade. It's not that clear that there's been a drop of games. Okay, there's obviously a lot more games during the Wii U days, but I think it becomes very clear when I start to remove all the kinda throwaway games that no one cares about, like Labo and Game Builder Garage and Sushi Striker and Star Fox Garden, etc., and just look at the normal ass games that released. I mean, I guess it's kinda subjective what you would count as a throwaway game, but whatever, it's my video. I get to do what I wanna do. What really doesn't help the situation is I don't think the quality of Switch games is high enough, at least compared to the Wii U, to warrant this lack of output. In fact, this is where the whole as a Wii U owner thing comes into light. I genuinely think that my ownership of a Wii U and 3DS as well as those libraries of games, has in turn led the Switch's lineup to be very underwhelming, and this has nothing to do with ports. A vast majority of games on Switch are pretty redundant of games already existing on Wii U or if not 3DS. A very depressingly large number of games are not substantial sequels, do not evolve on the formula. In a lot of cases, they're a step back from what we got previously, and it just gives Nintendo a bad image of complacency and laziness at times, rather than evolving the franchises that existed on Wii U. Why bother? Just hutch them up a little bit. Who would even notice, considering no one even played them in the first place? I think a prime example is Smash Ultimate, which is essentially a glorified Smash 4. And it doesn't begin to compare to Melee Brawl and, well yes, 4, which all had notable jumps in quality from their previous games. It feels more of a Smash 4.5 than a Smash 5. And the same goes for Splatoon 2 and Mario Maker 2. They feel like Splatoon 1.5 and Mario Maker 1.5 rather than fully fledged sequels. There's a lot of other games like this too, like Animal Crossing for the first year at least, the Pokemon games, Yoshi's Crafted World, Kirby Star Allies, Mario Golf. Actually, you know what? It would be faster to list the games that actually were good sequels. And yeah, I forgot to mention the drip-fed release model of a disturbingly large number of games on Switch. You know, it's disgusting, I hate it. It was a thing with Splatoon on the Wii U and, well, I hated it back then, but it's so much worse now because Nintendo does it with pretty much every game they can possibly do it with, including Nintendo Switch Sports, which they're being 100% transparent with us that they released an unfinished game at launch. That's also kinda pretty pricey for what it is. It's just a cheap, greedy way of cutting costs on games. Being able to pull the plug on a game if it underperforms, or trying to maintain exposure for a game as long as possible while simultaneously screwing over the people who actually bought it at launch. It's so anti-consumer. Anyway, moving on. I think it's really weird how people brush off the Wii U as if it had nothing to offer. I can understand the argument that the Switch has more good games, but I've seen so many people claim that the Wii U had a terrible library, or filled to the brim with shovelware titles. I mean, are we even looking at the same games as each other? The Wii U had Pikmin 3, Smash 4, Bayonetta 2, Mario Kart 8, 3D World, Tropical Freeze, Nintendo Land. It had a fantastic library, especially for its time when I don't think the competition was doing so hard. Back in 2014, when the Wii U was easily a better option than the PS4 and especially Xbox One. Yes, the Switch has great games too, but it's not one-sided like so many people make it out to be. And it's a massive shame that so many people overlook the quality of a lot of these Wii U games and, well, 3DS games too. I can't stress enough that the 3DS had great games on the side of the Wii U and not so much for the Switch. And okay, I just wanted to nail in a point of quality of games by looking at the individual first-party franchises. Here's a little table I made of the franchises, you know, whether I think they were better on the Wii U/3DS or Switch, or if I'm on the fence. I could elaborate on my choices, but okay, fine, I'll talk about the Mario franchise. Especially considering it's Nintendo's flagship franchise, I think it's kinda a joke how it's been treated compared to previously. Sure, we get a few good games like Luigi's Mansion 3, Mario Party's going in a better direction, Mario Odyssey is a praised game, and yeah, Paper Mario the Origami King is a masterpiece and the best Switch game, but beyond that, it's been a very underwhelming time for the franchise. The Wii U and 3DS had 3D Land, 3D World, New Super Mario Bros. 2 U and Luigi U, all within a short period of time, which mind you was only so long after the Wii and DS's games. I mean, 3D Land only came out a year after Galaxy 2. The Switch, on the other hand, hasn't had a single 2D Mario game, and it's been 5 years since Mario Odyssey, which is unprecedented to have to wait that long between 3D Mario games. I guess you could count Bowser's Fury, but I kind of view that as more of a short little expansion to 3D World than its own thing. On top of that, we had way more spin-off games, of which were higher quality. Mario Golf World Tour, for instance, is so much better than Super Rush, and there were plenty of RPGs to play as well. Oh, and of course, we had 2 Mario Kart games compared to 0 on the Switch. I just find it pretty obvious that the Mario franchise is kinda in the dumps right now. But it's not just the Mario franchise, which of course explains this table. I'm not going to go through the rest of the franchises, and maybe a few of them are a little too subjective like Fire Emblem, but I would argue that a good majority of Nintendo franchises flourished a lot more on the Wii U and 3DS. Okay, so I think there's more than enough time wasted talking about video games, but well, that's the thing, it's not just the video games that I have issue with. I really feel like a lot of components of Nintendo have just fallen flat compared to previously. Notably pricing, which has become a massive issue. I somehow failed to mention it in my previous video, but it's a serious problem. It's always been an issue, of course. Nintendo is kind of the equivalent of the Disney of video games. They can get away with exorbitant pricing because they can. I mean, they're Nintendo, right? but it's so much worse these days, mostly because there isn't a balance between handheld and home consoles. Their AAA fully priced main titles would release on home consoles, whereas their smaller scale budget franchise used to release on handheld for a reduced price. Most Nintendo games these days release fully priced, ranging from games that justify their price tag at launch, like Breath of the Wild, to 10-hour Game Boy remakes that have barely any new content and that isn't even well optimized that is also, you guessed it, $60. A Link Between Worlds was a brand new game that was cheaper. On top of that, there's a lack of any price drops. 5 years into the system and we still don't have Nintendo Selects. They're still selling Breath of the Wild for $60, it's ridiculous. Wii U ports are also fully priced. Keep in mind that the Wii U was selling Wii games for $20 digitally. The Switch is selling Tropical Freeze and Skyward Sword for more than what they were originally priced as. I really hope Nintendo doesn't follow Microsoft and Sony and increase their prices, but well, we all know that they will. Get your asses prepared to start spending $70 on Nintendo Switch 2 titles going into the future with no price drops. Oh, but it's not just the games, it's online. Because of course Nintendo would follow Microsoft and Sony with paid online services. Well, again, I'm not trying to be hypocritical or anything, but at least both of those companies seemingly invest said money into providing actual functional services that work. Nintendo Switch Online is functionally the same exact thing it was before they started charging money for it. And, well, would you look at that? The Wii U and 3DS, to this day, that you can still play online for free. And of course, that's not mentioning the awful replacement of Virtual Console. I get that the Wii U and 3DS's Virtual Consoles were never that great, the emulation quality was a little iffy, there aren't that many options, nor a large selection of games, but it's definitely, infinitely better than what the Switch has on offer, and what it will end up being replaced by. I mean, only after 5 years now, we still don't have every first-party NES and SNES game. Then on top of that, only just kind of recently, after 4.5 years after release, we finally get N64 and Genesis games. Keep in mind that the Wii had N64 games at launch, and that was only 10 years after the N64 launched. That would be the equivalent of having $15 Wii games emulated on the Switch at launch. Or $15 emulated Wii U games later this year. Well, ignoring inflation at least. We're half a decade into the Switch and we still only have 4 libraries of games to choose from, and 2 of which don't even have that many games included to begin with because it hasn't been around for that long, which are both locked behind a massive paywall. The N64 emulation in general is awful. The Genesis games you can own for cheaper on pretty much any other platform, and, well, DLC that you just have access to and can't keep, so you might as well just buy them separately if you actually wanted them. The expansion pass is just a joke. It costs more than double the amount of the standard subscription, while not even coming close to offering double the amount of content. I think it's really gross that they charge so much for this service when it's worse than the Wii and Wii U's Virtual Consoles, and it's especially gross to think we'll have to wait another 2 years minimum before seeing any other possible libraries, if we're lucky, that is. Anyway, what else is there to complain about? The menu and UI? I hate it. Sure, folders were introduced if you can call it that, but it doesn't really fix the whole menu issue to me. It's such a mess. I really miss the more charming menus of the Wii U and especially 3DS, and of course themes would be great. I get that Nintendo's pushed a philosophy with the Switch's UI to push for a more quick and snappy menu that takes up no space, but I'd rather have to wait another second or two to load up a Switch if it meant we could get a better UI. Nintendo's public presence these days is non-existent. With the death of Nintendo Minute last year, well, I don't know, I feel like that's the nail on the coffin. There's no personality, no human elements to Nintendo anymore. And the lack of Nintendo Directs doesn't help at all. We only really get 3 of them a year nowadays, if that, and all of them are so robotic with no charm or personality. Sure, they're a soulless, for-profit company, whatever, but I still miss these older days during the Wii U era, when they had way more frequent events and directs, with collaborations with YouTubers, the World Championship revivals, a lot more to boot. Nintendo these days is so soulless and depressing in comparison. And what about Nintendo's reward services? I do like getting discounts with the gold coins to be fair, but my Nintendo as a whole is complete garbage compared to Club Nintendo. Looking at Club Nintendo even in Australia, where we had barely gotten any crumbs compared to America and Japan and other countries, we still had so many rewards. Posters, merch, soundtracks, the occasional game here and there, controllers even. My Nintendo, after however many years, finally introduced physical rewards through the service, but you still have to pay exorbitant shipping fees, so it defeats the whole purpose of free rewards, especially when the products themselves were probably worth less than the shipping costs. And just look at the current version of my Nintendo. There used to be a few things here and there, a couple of virtual console games to redeem, more themes and discounts, wallpapers, etc. This is just a husk of what it used to be, which was already a husk of the previous Club Nintendo. And I guess as a topic of the fan base, I know I shouldn't discuss this because it isn't Nintendo, but I'll just say that the toxicity within the fan base as of the past few years has made my experience with Nintendo that much worse. The fanbase was always toxic, don't get me wrong, but I do not remember it being this bad during the Wii U days. It used to be a much nicer, tight-knit community that wasn't tearing at people's throats 24/7, and well, I miss those days. And Miiverse, I really miss Miiverse, and I never thought I'd be saying that. To end off this video, I wanted to discuss the hardware, which has gotten to a point where it's a tad bit annoying, well, extremely annoying. The Switch was using outdated hardware when it released with its 2015 Tegra X1 chip thingy, or whatever it's called. And look, that's fine, I guess. I don't expect PS5 level hardware from a portable console, but more than 5 years of this with no upgrades, it's really about time we get a new Nintendo console. And it's not just the hardware, but it's the build quality as well. Remember when Nintendium used to be a thing? Well, not so much anymore. In particular, and I'm sure you all know this, the Joy-Cons are honestly one of the worst Nintendo controllers ever. And it's made so much worse by the fact that they are one of the most expensive Nintendo controllers ever. Honestly, I just find the Switch to be a terrible compromise, it being a hybrid. I know that's why people praise it so much and why it's been such a massive success, but I honestly hate it. To me, it's not a good compromise. It's not the best of both worlds, it's quite the opposite, it's the worst of both worlds. I'd much rather just have separate home and handheld consoles. The Switch is an awful handheld because of its design. It's not ergonomic, especially in the non-light models, and it's way too large and clunky to carry around with like older handhelds, like the 3DS or Vita, or your phone. You're not going to be pulling a Switch out of your pocket to play on the bus or anything like that, and I really hate how the Switch has more or less set the new standard of handheld systems. Everything these days, like the Steam Deck, seems to be replicating this massive tablet design, rather than something more ergonomic, and I really hate that direction. It also fails at being a good home console because of its compromised hardware. Though to be fair, I don't really feel like it being a handheld necessarily limits the hardware capabilities, it just, Nintendo doesn't want to invest in a new Switch, but it does mean that Nintendo will never, ever be on par with its competition in terms of hardware, and I really wish that wasn't the case. So we're left with a console that is simultaneously a poor man's handheld and a poor man's home console, but hey, I guess that's an extremely unpopular opinion because it's the main praise the system gets. Anyway, I think I've complained more than enough at the Switch at this point. If what I said hasn't convinced you to why viewing the Wii U days is better than the Switch days is a valid perspective and viewpoint or opinion overall, then nothing I say will. Well, I'm sure no matter what I say, there will be numerous fanboys that will just skim through this video or not watch it at all just to jump into the comments and blindly defend Nintendo as if their life depends on it. So whatever. What I'll say to conclude this video is I feel like Nintendo's blunder with the Wii U in the long term impacted the loyal fans more than the company itself, considering it really didn't take too long for them to get back on their feet again. And it did set the groundwork for the Switch and its success anyway. I'm not saying I deserve recognition for supporting the Wii U or anything like that, and as I've implied, I don't regret buying the Wii U at all. I do think it was the better option to the PS4 and especially Xbox One at the time. And of course, I was able to experience so many fantastic first-party games years before most people were able to. But in retrospect, my ownership and support of the Wii U has in turn made the Switch era extremely underwhelming and disappointing, to the point where my interest in Nintendo has more or less completely plummeted. Had I skipped to the Wii U and to a lesser extent 3DS, I think I would have been a lot more content with the Switch, but that just isn't the case, and I will say that I easily play more PlayStation and PC games than Nintendo games currently, and that was actually not the case back when the Wii U was still a current system. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say on this topic. I don't plan on making a third video or anything like this down the line. I hope you liked this video, I hope I didn't really miss anything. But yeah, anyway, thanks for watching, I really appreciate it. I'd be more than happy to see all of your opinions on this topic in the comments, and I consider subscribing if you haven't. Yeah, I don't know. Watch my Sonic video. Peace out.